with the only light being glowing images of various weapons, vehicles, starships, and other interests of interstellar war. Maps with tactical and strategic overlays, timetables and scores of contingency for each point on them, and the possible results of each. The amount of information was immense, as it covered nearly every possible aspect of war, from the training and material makeup of troops to the latest advances in foe speed targeting. This database had been compiled by the man leading this meeting of the minds for the express purpose of answering a simple question. The others around the table had been pursuing and examining the data at hand, cross-examining the conclusions of others while being similarly challenged. This had been going on for the better part of 3 weeks. Not that any would notice after the meeting was done, and this pocket bubble of temporal reality was closed, ending the meeting a comfortable 2 hours after its beginning, relative to the rest of the world. None outside those present would even be aware that the meeting had happened at all. The clear conclusion so far after 3 weeks was one that did not sit well with any in attendance, least of which being the man that had arranged for this all. He raised his hand and the room went quiet. You are the greatest and most experienced minds in the matters of combat, war, and its logical and illogical prosecution. You have had at hand the most complete record in the realms of the arms, men, and equipment known to be available, ever compiled. And after 3 weeks of discussion and deliberation, you are nowhere closer to a consensus than when we started. The man continues. War is again coming to the realms, but none here can even predict with any confidence what it might look like. None amongst you have seen their theories survive counter unscathed or unbroken. War is a crucible that is the essence of chaos, and even knowing the framework of the conflicts to come, there's too much unknown and untested for any of us to say how and in what manner the coming conflicts will be fought. There's just too much that has not seen true conflict on the levels we are talking about. The Scriptorum War was a panic and confused mess of engagements that saw both sides move with nothing approaching a clear strategy. No major deployment of space assets further complicates these matters. The voice replied from the far side of the table. Beyond the lack of theater-scale combat data for our spaceships, the various proliferations of other forms of super combat vehicles, walkers, as well as the air assets that are now common, none of these have been used together in any sort of large-scale combat, and only barely in smaller fights. We can guess all age about this, Verisar, but the harsh truth is we're going into this one blind. The room was unnaturally silent, as Verisar Skychild considered the other man's words carefully. Old friend, we are not so blind as to not be able to figure out the edges of this picture, even the highlights and contrast. I refuse to accept this. For one, we know the Empire will be the aggressor. We know that their troops, like our, favor a series of squad and unit formations. And, while they no longer have the issue, we know that until they reconnected with Homeworld, they had a massively harder time in the use and collection of Christ for most purposes. Thus, they have far more advanced ballistic weaponry than we do in general, including automatic weapons, artillery, and other such niceties. These are all free of any dependency on Christ or its acquisition. This and 1,000 other facts do not present to any of you any insight as to how we can best prepare for this. Again, silence reigned, until a third voice was raised. Well, if after 3 weeks we can't reach an accord on the basics of how the Empire will conduct whatever wars they no doubt do intend, the same must be said for them. There is as much, if not more, untested magic, material, and men that will see action in this coming war on our side as theirs. They cannot be any clearer on our manner of war as we are of theirs. The problem with that line of reasoning is simple, Verisar replied. Our foe knows what their aims and objectives are, and will have formed their plans accordingly. We, however, have no clue in that matter, and to try to defend everything will see us sundered. Beyond the taking of Jam'mar herself, which is beyond the reach of even the Empire. Unless they wish to take the matter up with Her Majesty personally, that is. A small wave of chuckles rose from the assembled group. That leaves us with the potential targets and goals that are unclear. Even with the data that was obtained by the hunters, we have shockingly little to go on. Clairvoyance played on his face as he sat back, waving the images away and letting light return to the area around the table, ending the time bubble. Thank you for your time. Please take your copies of the data and do what you can to prepare. And keep in touch. The rest of the collected group looked between themselves in a silent shock, with the rapidity of the ending, before nodding and saying their goodbyes, excusing themselves from the private room, soon leaving only Verisar and a small elven child looking at each other from across the room. The child's eyes lacked the normal mischief that was a seemingly permanent feature of them normally, as he took Verisar in from his perch on top of the door, leaving the room. Not sure I've ever seen you like this. The voice was strange coming from such a young face, but it made clear there were no jokes or pranks at play. You've dealt with the unknown countless times. What makes this time so different? This time I know we're missing something, and something big. The hands are in play. Gods have been more or less left out of the loop entirely. Her Majesty is less than amused. Verisar was angry. And we all but know who is behind this, who's pulling the strings of the Empire. And we can't do a damn thing about it because we lack the intel to properly act. And because of that, billions are going to die. The elven boy nodded his head, taking Verisar's words in before replying. You've always been soft when it comes to these things. War is not a thing, dragon. Verisar flipped the table, throwing it at the elf child form the dragon Tradis had taken, who merely caught it and held it mid-air with seemingly no effort. For a moment, the elven purple eyes of his form took on an entirely more draconic shape, before returning with their mischief again, bringing a bright light to them. Verisar, never lose that. Never lose what makes you who we all look to. But for now, discussion over. Time to get going. We have work to do, don't we? With that, the table returned to where it belonged, and both the men left, fading silently into the air. By the 9 and 4, welcome back to the library, where, in this entry, we will have a brief look on how warfare in the realms has looked in the many ages prior to this current age of stars and pending interstellar conflict. I am the recorder, and to my perceptive patrons, regular visitors, and new guests, I bid greetings and will make no excuses for the brevity of this entry, as this, as always, is just an overview of the topic. However, the pressing fact that for all her ages and numerous conflicts that have transpired during them, Jam'mar has seen little in massive scale conflict between powers seeking to annihilate their rivals. From the earliest days, there would be occasional war or conflict between neighbors, but these rarely involve more than a few hundred or perhaps 1,000 at any one battle for either side, more often in total. Moved as blocks of troops in formation, these would have formed the basic building blocks for these early conflicts, so long as it was not between any of the greater powers, who, with one glaring exception over the ages, have not engaged in open war with one another in any great amount. In these early days, magic and those who could wield it effectively in the field of conflict and in its preparation were the largest factor in determining the victor of any battle. Thus, the larger powers such as Deepgate, Domnitra, and Avlin were able to leverage their superior population, education, and training base to ensure that they always had magical assets of a far higher quality, skill, and quantity than that of smaller nations. In this era, magic constructs in the years of war were rare and very potent, often serving as the centerpiece of a force. This general state of affairs persisted even throughout the wars of feather and scale to some extent, as while the Analaran dragons fought a very different kind of war in a very different kind of way, their manner of combat was neither known nor replicatable by the younger races. You begin to see the drift away from large blocks of troops and into smaller unit formations, aiding in the mitigating of the rising number of highly skilled magical assets and new forms of crisp weaponry being employed in this war between elders. With the summoning of the daemon and the rain that followed, Jam'mar suffered heavily in the areas of Cris-Tech knowledge. In fact, the methods for producing the majority of devices had been lost by the younger races by the end of the reign, leaving magic again as the undisputed king of the battlefield, until the middle of the Age of Valor, as the knowledge and lore of such had been spread far and wide at this point, making the training and self-teaching of the magically gifted easier and within reach of a far number greater accounts. However, by the middle of the Age of Valor, the secrets of Cris-Tech were being rediscovered, and Christ weapons of various forms began to see development in the fields of various border disputes and in the armories of various powers. Despite this, there was again very little large-scale conflict, and thus war once more changed very little, with smaller units being used in lieu of mass formations, armed as needed and generally supported by magical backing as required. Even with the Wars of the Spark, and to a lesser extent the Necropolis' war on Avlin, war was not the norm by any means. Even with these conflicts, which in the case of the War of the Spark was waged across the entire world of Jam'mar, the battles were between smaller forces each attempting to achieve an objective, neither applying a total war approach by any means. This again limited the damage and overall effects of these conflicts. Tactics and strategy stayed mainly the same, with the occasional innovation in magical theory granting an advantage to one side or the other for a time. The beginning of the Age of Stars introduced Jam'mar and her growing realms to a new form of warfare, that of interstellar space combat. The Scriptorum conflict is recounted by all involved as a time of high tensions, confused and frantic action, and the beginning of industrial-scale backed warfare. While many of the battles that did occur tended to follow established ideas and understanding of the conduct of war, the introduction of things such as orbital fire support and magical backing from orbit, as well as several novel responses to such, made the affair a giant quagmire that did little to establish what war in this new age will look like. Further confusing matters is the vast increase in technological and magical base the realms now have. The introduction of Teltechian understandings of science and engineering, as well as various lost forms of Christech that have been obtained, have led to a technological, weapons, and industrial revolution. From the Rodkin and New Earth, Christech combat walker wielding the Rodkin signature ballistic weaponry have proven to pose a serious threat by themselves. However, like the Rodkin themselves, they train and fight in packs of 4 to 9 of these up to 50-foot tall, multi-legged walkers. The Praetorians iterate and fuse the techno-magical advances of other races to create wholly new uses or improvements. Spaceships of various designs are built daily, many of these with new ideas as part of their creation. Each race and nation has been revisiting its stocks of lore and coaxing its designers in an attempt to not be left behind in this now necessary race for the security of their people. Of import to this discussion as a footnote, due to the natures of cities and how basic Christech, defensive in nature, was so bound into their management, construction, and defense, most battles over a city would be fought far afield from its walls, if at all. Attempting to siege a walled city with success is a rare thing with the array of options most cities had to sustain their population and mitigate any attacks that failed to overwhelm the defenders. Magical production of food, water, and other necessities, along with the near limitless supply of power to keep these systems running, makes such an endeavor foolhardy at best. Just another thing that may no longer hold as true, as outside the greatest of cities, what village or hamlet could hope to deal with an orbital bombardment, for example. All of this is, in short, to say that there are so many advances in weapons, tactics, theory, and magical means of waging war, combined with the lack of extended campaigns of war to have them tested by, that for all involved, war in the current age is a frightful unknown, both in its form and its reach. Both an unsatisfying conclusion, yet an exciting prospect, as in whatever conflict may be in the realm's near future, these questions and their answers are sure to be things of history and legend. And with that, this all too brief of the general history of warfare within the realms, what little there is of it, is at its end. As always, my perceptive patrons, regular visitors, as well as the new guests of the library, I am grateful for you taking the time to continue to explore and learn about the realms of Jam'mR with me. Thank you. And until you next make your way back to the library for your next entry, by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other. If you'd like to contribute to the further exploration and explanation of the realms, please consider leaving a comment, a like, and sharing the video around. I read all the comments and make efforts to reply to each. Thank you for helping to grow the channel, and know I look forward to each and every one of your comments. Other methods of support can be found in the channel's description. Thank you for watching.